Let's ease into tonight's journey together, shall we? Picture this. It's 1943. The world is tearing itself apart at the seams. A symphony of steel and fire playing out across oceans and continents. But down here, beneath the crushing weight of the Atlantic, it's a different kind of war. A silent, claustrophobic ballet of cat and mouse, where the stakes are life and an agonizingly slow death. Forget the Hollywood glamour, the heroic last stands, the clean uniforms. Forget the pristine control rooms bathed in patriotic light. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of romanticized naval history and diving headfirst into the grim, dripping, foul-smelling reality of what it meant to be a submarine crew member during World War II. And let me tell you, if you think your daily commute is rough, you haven't even begun to understand true discomfort. We're talking about a world where every single breath is recycled, every sound amplified, and every moment is a desperate gamble against the depths and the enemy. You, the modern person, with your ergonomic chairs, your filtered water, your unlimited data plans, are about to be stripped of every single comfort, every single expectation. You're about to be plunged into a metal tube hundreds of feet below the surface, where the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only escape is often the kind you don't want to think about. This isn't just a story, it's a visceral simulation, a challenge to your very notion of resilience. Because, let's be clear, most of you wouldn't last a single solitary day, and we'll get into exactly why in horrifying detail next. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe so you'll always know when a new one is uploaded. And I'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. Let's start with the living conditions, or rather, the complete and utter lack thereof. You awaken, if you can even call it that, not to the gentle chimes of your smartphone alarm, but to the groaning symphony of the submarine itself. Every creak of the hull, every thrum of the engines, every distant clanging of a wrench against metal, that's your wake-up call. Your bed, not a memory foam mattress, not even a cot. Imagine a canvas hammock slung precariously close to a torpedo tube, or perhaps directly above the engine room, where the heat radiates with an intensity that would make a sauna feel like a walk in a winter park. There's no personal space, none whatsoever. Your bunk is a temporary claim in a constantly shifting landscape of bodies, equipment, and the pervasive, cloying smell of diesel, sweat, stale food, and human effluvia. Forget standing upright. Unless you're in the central control room, you're perpetually stooped, navigating a labyrinth of pipes, valves, and bulkheads that seem designed to bruise every inch of your body. The air itself is a character in this grim drama. It's thick, heavy, laden with the exhalations of dozens of men, the metallic tang of machinery, and the lingering scent of unwashed bodies. Ventilation is a luxury reserved for surface operations, and even then, it's a meager offering. Down here, deep beneath the waves, you're breathing recycled air, air that has passed through filters that are likely overdue for a change, air that has been shared by every single soul on board. It's an intimate, almost sickening exchange, a constant reminder of your collective fate. And as for privacy, that's a concept that simply doesn't exist. Every cough, every sigh, every whispered conversation is public domain. Your personal life, your thoughts, your very bodily functions become part of the collective experience. There's no escaping the watchful, if often oblivious, eyes of your shipmates. Every movement is calculated, every action observed. You are a cog in a human machine, and individuality is a luxury you cannot afford. This is your new normal, a reality so far removed from your comfortable existence that it might as well be an alien planet. And we haven't even gotten to the food yet. Oh, the food. That's a delightful tale for our next installment. Speaking of delightful tales, let's talk about sustenance, or what passes for it in this metal coffin. Your first meal of the day, if you're lucky enough to be on a watch rotation that allows for it, is a grim affair. Forget your artisanal toast and avocado. Your breakfast is likely to be a monotonous rotation of rehydrated eggs, powdered, gritty, and tasting faintly of sulfur, or perhaps some form of hardtack, a biscuit so dense and unyielding it could double as a defensive weapon. Coffee, if available, is lukewarm, bitter, and brewed from water that has been desalinated and recycled multiple times, carrying with it a faint, metallic aftertaste. Every meal is a battle against boredom and the encroaching effects of scurvy. Fresh provisions are a rare and precious commodity, quickly consumed in the first days out of port. After that, you're looking at canned goods, preserved meats that have lost most of their flavor and texture, and dehydrated vegetables that never quite regain their original vibrancy. The cooks, bless their souls, do their best with what little they have, but culinary artistry is not a priority when survival is the main objective. Imagine eating the same tasteless, lukewarm slop day after day, week after week. The monotony alone is enough to drive a person to the brink. And the constant rocking of the boat, even when submerged, combined with the ever-present stench of diesel and unwashed bodies, doesn't exactly stimulate the appetite. Many men suffer from chronic nausea, a persistent queasiness that makes every bite an act of defiance against their protesting stomachs. Dehydration is a constant threat. Water, while available, is rationed. Every drop is precious, every sip measured. The luxury of a long, hot shower, a distant, almost mythical dream. Your body, accustomed to abundant hydration, would begin to protest almost immediately, headaches pounding, energy levels plummeting. And remember that recycled air? It only compounds the problem, drying out your mouth and throat, making the already unappetizing food even harder to swallow. This isn't just about hunger, it's about the psychological toll of deprivation, the slow grinding erosion of morale that comes from a diet devoid of pleasure and nutrition. You'd find yourself fantasizing about a crisp apple, a fresh loaf of bread, a glass of ice-cold water, simple pleasures that are now as unattainable as a trip to the moon. And what about the waste from all this nourishment? Ah, yes, that's another delightful layer to this putrid cake. So, you've eaten your bland, recycled meal, or attempted to. Now, your body, in its infinite wisdom, needs to process that fuel. And here's where we enter another delightful realm of submarine life, sanitation, or more accurately, the utter lack thereof. Forget your porcelain throne, your bidets, your scented soaps. The latrine, often just a few feet from where men are eating or sleeping, is a utilitarian affair. Imagine a small, cramped compartment, usually shared by dozens of men, with a single toilet that empties directly into the ocean. Sounds simple enough, right? Wrong. Every flush is a delicate operation, requiring precise timing and strict adherence to protocol. Because if you flush at the wrong depth, or during a sudden change in pressure, the ocean, in all its majestic indifference, will simply decide to flush back. Yes, you heard that right. A torrent of seawater, often mixed with, well, you can imagine what, can come rushing back into the boat, creating an instant, horrifying geyser of filth. This isn't a hypothetical, it's a documented, very real fear for submariners. So, you learn to time your ablutions with an almost religious fervor, always checking the depth gauges, always listening for the subtle shifts in the boat's pressure, and even when successful, the smell. Oh, the smell. It permeates everything. The enclosed environment ensures that no odor ever truly dissipates. It clings to the walls, the fabric, the very air you breathe. The shared nature of this particular facility, combined with the lack of proper ventilation, means that it's a constant, lingering presence. And personal hygiene, again, a luxury. Showers are a pipe dream, something you might get once every few weeks, if that, and usually only when surfaced and able to conserve fresh water. Most of the time, you're lucky to get a quick rinse with a bucket of lukewarm, desalinated water or a wipe down with a damp cloth. Your clothes, your skin, your hair all become infused with the signature submarine aroma, a potent cocktail of sweat, diesel, mold, and that ever-present faint hint of human waste. You would quickly develop a profound appreciation for soap and running water, items you now take for granted. The simple act of feeling truly clean would become an almost spiritual yearning. Your skin would break out, your hair would become matted, and your general sense of well-being would plummet. This isn't just about discomfort. It's about the dehumanizing aspect of constant uncleanliness, the subtle erosion of your dignity in the face of such relentless squalor. And if you think the external conditions are bad, wait until we delve into what's happening inside your body. Let's talk about your physical body, that temple of modern comfort and pristine hygiene. Down here it's a biological battleground. The lack of proper sanitation, combined with the cramped quarters and the constant proximity to other men, creates a perfect breeding ground for every imaginable ailment. Colds, flus, skin infections, fungal growths. These aren't just minor inconveniences, they're potential epidemics in the making. One man gets sick, and within days, the entire crew is battling the same affliction. Imagine trying to recover from a violent bout of stomach flu or a persistent hacking cough while crammed into a stifling, rocking metal tube hundreds of feet below the surface with no access to fresh air or proper medical care. The ship's medic, if there even is one with significant training, has a limited supply of basic medicines, aspirin, bandages, maybe some rudimentary antibiotics if you're lucky. There are no specialists, no operating rooms, no sterile environments. Every cut, every blister, every ingrown toenail is a potential source of infection, a pathway for bacteria to enter your already stressed system. Skin conditions, exacerbated by the constant humidity, the sweat, and the lack of proper washing, are rampant. Rashes, boils, fungal infections in every crevice imaginable. These are not just unsightly, they are painful, itchy, and profoundly debilitating. And then there's the more insidious threat, lung conditions. The recycled air constantly recirculated often contains traces of diesel fumes, welding gases, and other industrial pollutants. Over prolonged periods, this can lead to chronic respiratory problems, a persistent cough, and a general feeling of congestion. Your lungs, accustomed to the crisp, clean air of the surface world, would quickly begin to protest. And what about injuries? A sudden lurch of the boat, a pipe giving way, a dropped tool, any of these could result in a broken bone, a deep laceration, or a concussion. And in this environment, a serious injury can quickly become a death sentence. There's no quick evacuation, no air ambulance. You are entirely at the mercy of the limited resources on board. Your physical resilience, honed by years of comfortable living, would be tested to its absolute breaking point. This isn't about minor discomfort. It's about the constant assault on your body's defenses, the relentless siege against your physical health. And if your body is struggling, believe me, your mind isn't far behind. Ah, the mind. That intricate, delicate instrument that craves stimulation, privacy, and a sense of control. Down here, it's subjected to a relentless psychological assault. The constant claustrophobia, the absolute lack of personal space, the never-ending noise of machinery and muffled conversations, it all conspires to chip away at your sanity, piece by agonizing piece. There's no escape, nowhere to retreat. Even in your bunk, you're acutely aware of the bodies pressed in around you, the sounds of others breathing, the faint snores or restless movements. Sleep, when it comes, is often fitful and shallow, punctuated by the unsettling creaks of the hull or the distant thrum of propellers. Nightmares, if you're prone to them, become vivid, suffocating experiences, often replaying the anxieties of your waking hours. The lack of natural light is profoundly disorienting. Days blend into nights, weeks into an indistinguishable blur. Your circadian rhythm, that internal clock that governs your sleep-wake cycle, would be utterly shattered. You'd find yourself perpetually tired, yet unable to achieve deep, restorative sleep. This chronic sleep deprivation exacerbates every other stressor, making you irritable, short-tempered, and prone to irrational outbursts. And then there's the pervasive sense of dread. Every ping of the sonar, every distant thud, every sudden lurch of the boat sends a jolt of adrenaline through your system. You are constantly aware of the thin steel shell separating you from oblivion, the hundreds of feet of crushing water above you, the hidden enemy lurking just beyond the reach of your instruments. The fear isn't just a fleeting emotion, it's a constant companion, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of every thought. This constant state of heightened alert, known as hypervigilance, drains your mental reserves, leaving you exhausted and emotionally frayed. The monotony of the daily routine, broken only by moments of extreme terror, further contributes to the psychological strain. There are no distractions, no entertainment beyond a few dog-eared books or a deck of cards. Your mind, starved of external stimuli, would turn inwards, often dwelling on the most unsettling possibilities. Many men developed eccentric habits, rituals to ward off the encroaching madness, or simply to reclaim some small semblance of control in a world where control was an illusion. And if you think the internal pressures are intense, wait until the external pressures begin to mount. Let's turn our attention to the actual job, the reason you're in this suffocating metal tube in the first place. War. This isn't a desk job, folks. This is a job where failure isn't a bad performance review. It's a catastrophic explosion, a rapid descent to the ocean floor, and an agonizing death by crushing pressure or drowning. The constant danger is palpable, a silent passenger sharing every inch of the submarine. Every single moment you're submerged, you are a target. The enemy, whether it's an Allied destroyer or a German U-boat, is actively hunting you, listening for your every move, anticipating your every maneuver. Imagine trying to focus on a complex task, monitoring sonar, adjusting depth, calculating firing solutions, knowing that at any second a depth charge could rupture the hull or a torpedo could send you to a watery grave. The sheer volume of noise, even when trying to be silent, is a constant source of anxiety. The whirring of the gyros, the hum of the motors, the distant thrum of enemy propellers, every sound is scrutinized, analyzed, interpreted for potential threats. A sudden change in engine pitch, a faint scraping sound against the hull. These aren't just noises, they're harbingers of potential doom. The stress of combat is almost unimaginable. During a depth charge attack, the submarine is rocked violently, objects are thrown about, lights flicker, and the very structure groans under the immense pressure. The sound of a depth charge exploding nearby is not just loud, it's a physical assault, a gut-wrenching concussion that rattles your teeth and vibrates through your bones. The water around you literally boils from the force of the explosion. And then the silence, that terrifying, pregnant pause where you wait, holding your breath, listening for the telltale rush of water, the signs of a breach, the screams of your shipmates. Every second stretches into an eternity. Your training, your discipline, your sheer will to survive are all that stand between you and a horrifying end. There are no second chances, no redos. This isn't a game. It's a desperate struggle for survival, where the odds are often stacked against you. Many men would simply freeze, their minds unable to process the sheer terror, their bodies locked in an involuntary paralysis. And if by some miracle you survive the immediate attack, the ordeal is far from over. The real struggle often begins in the aftermath. So, the depth charges have stopped for now. The immediate threat has passed, or so you hope. But the aftermath of an attack is often as brutal as the attack itself, if not more so. Your ears are ringing, your body aches, and the acrid smell of burnt wiring or strained metal hangs heavy in the air. The boat might be damaged, limping along, every creak and groan a potential harbinger of a catastrophic failure. Damage control becomes the immediate, frantic priority. Leaks must be plugged, fires extinguished, damaged equipment repaired, all while still submerged and still operating under the assumption that the enemy could return at any moment. Imagine trying to patch a breach in the hull, water rushing in near total darkness, with the added anxiety that the fix might not hold. The sheer physical exertion, combined with the lingering adrenaline dump, is utterly exhausting. And beyond the physical damage, there's the psychological toll, the constant dread, the near-death experience, the realization of just how fragile your existence is. It all settles into your mind like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The men around you, your shipmates, are equally rattled. Some might be silently weeping, others outwardly shaken, some desperately trying to maintain a facade of calm. The camaraderie, forged in shared hardship, is stronger than ever, but it's a bond born of desperation, not of shared joy. You see the fear in their eyes, mirroring the fear in your own. The silence, when it finally settles, is not peaceful. It's a tense, nervous, quiet, punctuated by the occasional sob or the quiet clanking of tools as repairs continue. The air is still thick with the smell of danger, and the memory of the explosion still reverberates through your bones. You're left with the horrifying realization that this wasn't a movie, this wasn't a drill, this was real. And it could happen again and again. The constant threat of death, the brutal, unyielding reality of war, imprints itself on your psyche in ways you can never truly shake. Many submariners carried these invisible wounds long after the war ended, haunted by the ghosts of the deep, by the sounds and smells of their watery tomb. And what happens when you're caught? When escape is no longer an option? That's a grim tale, but one we must confront. Let's confront the grimmest possibility: capture. If your submarine is severely damaged, forced to surface, and overrun by the enemy, your immediate fate is utterly unknown. Forget the Geneva Convention as a guaranteed safety net. In the heat of battle, especially a battle as brutal as the one waged at sea, rules were often bent, broken, or entirely disregarded. Your capture could range from a relatively civilized imprisonment, if you were lucky enough to fall into the hands of a disciplined naval force, to a far more terrifying ordeal. Imagine being dragged from the confines of your familiar, albeit hellish, submarine, blinking in the harsh sunlight, surrounded by heavily armed, angry enemy sailors. The language barrier alone would be a terrifying impediment. Every gesture, every shouted command, misinterpreted or misunderstood. You would be interrogated, often harshly, sometimes brutally, for any scrap of intelligence you might possess. Sleep deprivation, physical abuse, psychological torment, these were not uncommon tactics. Your identity, your mission, your ship's capabilities, all would be probed, pressed, and relentlessly pursued. And even if you surrendered without resistance, there was always the risk of summary execution, particularly by certain belligerents. Naval warfare was often a desperate, no quarter given affair, and the sight of a surrendered enemy, especially one that had been inflicting heavy losses, could provoke extreme reactions. Even if spared, the prospect of a prisoner of war camp loomed large. These were not holiday resorts. They were places of deprivation, disease, starvation, and often systematic abuse. Your already battered body, weakened by weeks or months at sea, would struggle to cope with the further indignities of captivity. The psychological toll would be immense. The loss of freedom, the uncertainty of your fate, the constant gnawing fear for your family back home. Your resilience, already stretched thin, would be tested to its absolute breaking point. Escape attempts, if even contemplated, were fraught with peril, often ending in recapture, further punishment, or death. The lucky ones might survive, carrying the scars of their imprisonment for the rest of their lives. The unlucky ones, their fate would remain a mystery, swallowed by the tides of war. This is the ultimate nightmare, the final, terrifying conclusion to a life spent beneath the waves. And if you think your modern sensibilities could handle that, you are profoundly mistaken. Now, let's talk about the skills required, not just the endurance. You, the modern person, are accustomed to specialized roles, to clearly defined job descriptions. A submarine crew member in World War II was a polymath of necessity. You weren't just a torpedo man, you were also a mechanic, a plumber, an electrician, a firefighter, and often an impromptu medic. There was no calling in a specialist, no waiting for a contractor to arrive. When something broke, and believe me, things always broke, you fixed it immediately under immense pressure. With limited tools, often in the dark, and usually while the entire boat was being tossed around like a toy in a bathtub, imagine trying to troubleshoot a complex electrical fault deep within the engine room with diesel fumes stinging your eyes, the temperature soaring, and the knowledge that a single wrong move could cause a fire or a catastrophic system failure. Or picture yourself trying to repair a leaky pipe, water spraying everywhere, while the boat is desperately trying to evade depth charges. This wasn't about following a neatly printed manual. It was about improvisation, ingenuity, and a deep intuitive understanding of every single system on that boat. Every man had to know every other man's job, at least to a rudimentary degree, because casualties were a grim reality. If the primary electrician was incapacitated, the man next to him, regardless of his normal duties, had to step up and assume that role. There was no room for "that's not my job." Your life and the lives of your shipmates depended on your ability to adapt, to learn, to perform under unimaginable duress. The training was relentless, the expectations impossibly high. You were expected to master complex machinery, to understand the intricate physics of underwater navigation, to react with split-second precision in moments of crisis. Your brain, accustomed to the convenience of Google and predictive text, would be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information, the constant need for problem solving, the relentless demand for practical application. This wasn't theoretical knowledge, it was life or death knowledge. And the consequences of an error? Well, we've already covered that. It wasn't just about surviving the external threats. It was about having the internal fortitude and the mental agility to perform your duties flawlessly every single time. And even then, sometimes it wasn't enough. Let's delve into the ultimate unforgiving master of the deep, pressure. Not just the psychological pressure, but the literal crushing physical pressure of the ocean. Your submarine, a marvel of engineering for its time, was still a fragile shell against the immense forces at play. Every foot deeper you dove, the pressure increased exponentially, squeezing the hull, testing every rivet, every seam, every weld. The sounds inside the boat would change, becoming sharper, more metallic, as the steel groaned under the strain. Imagine sitting there, knowing that a single structural flaw, a tiny crack, a momentary loss of integrity, could lead to an instant, horrific implosion. The entire boat could be compressed into a fraction of its size in less than a second, an irreversible, terrifying fate. The depth gauge, prominently displayed, was a constant reminder of this existential threat, a silent countdown to the point of no return. Exceeding crush depth wasn't just a technical failure, it was a guaranteed, immediate, and utterly inescapable death. And during a depth charge attack, this fear was magnified 1,000-fold. The explosions not only shook the boat, but also created momentary, localized increases in pressure, testing the hull's limits in sudden, violent bursts. The crew would listen intently for the telltale rush of water, the sickening creak of protesting metal, the sounds that meant the end was near. The water outside was not just water, it was an active, malevolent force constantly trying to breach your sanctuary to reclaim the metal and the men within it. And the reverse was also true. Rapid surfacing could lead to a different kind of disaster. Blowing tanks, the process of expelling water to gain buoyancy, had to be carefully controlled. Too fast, and the sudden change in pressure could cause internal damage, injure crew members, or even cause the boat to broach, exposing it to enemy fire. So every maneuver, every change in depth was a carefully choreographed dance with oblivion. You accustomed to the benign pressures of the surface world would feel the weight of the ocean pressing in on you, not just metaphorically, but physically. The air itself, though compressed, would feel heavy, dense, a constant reminder of your precarious position. The awareness of being at the mercy of such immense natural forces, forces that could obliterate you in an instant, would be a profound and deeply unsettling realization. And the constant cold, oh yes, the cold, that's another layer of misery we need to explore. Let's talk about the pervasive, relentless cold. Not the kind of cold you experience when your heating bill is too high, but a damp, penetrating chill that seeps into your bones and never truly leaves. While engine rooms and certain compartments could be stiflingly hot, the rest of the submarine, especially during long patrols in the frigid waters of the Atlantic or Pacific, was a constant battle against hypothermia. The ocean surrounding you, often near freezing, conducted its icy embrace directly through the steel hull. There was no central heating, no cozy radiators. You relied on layers of wool clothing, often damp from condensation, to provide what little insulation you could. Imagine trying to sleep, shivering uncontrollably in your cramped bunk, listening to the drip, drip, drip of condensation collecting on the overhead pipes. Every surface you touched would be cold, clammy, and often slick with moisture. Your hands would be perpetually stiff, your fingers clumsy, making intricate tasks even more difficult. The cold would exacerbate every ache, every pain, every minor injury. It would drain your energy, dull your senses, and make even the simplest movements an effort. And the dampness, oh, the dampness, it was everywhere. Condensation formed on every cold surface, leading to a constant, pervasive moisture that made everything feel clammy and uncomfortable. Your clothes, your bedding, your books, all would feel perpetually damp, never quite drying out. This dampness, combined with the lack of fresh air, created a perfect breeding ground for mold and mildew, adding another layer of unpleasant odor and potential health risks. The air itself felt heavy with moisture, making it difficult to truly warm up. You would find yourself constantly rubbing your hands together, stomping your feet, doing anything to generate a bit of warmth, a fleeting reprieve from the biting chill. This wasn't a minor inconvenience, it was a constant, debilitating assault on your comfort and well-being. Your body, accustomed to climate-controlled environments, would quickly succumb to the misery of the relentless cold and damp. The thought of a warm, dry bed, a hot shower, or even just a genuinely dry pair of socks would become an almost obsessive fantasy. And if you think the physical discomfort is bad, wait until you consider the lack of connection to the outside world. Now, let's sever your lifelines. You, with your constant connectivity, your instant messaging, your social media feeds, imagine having all of that ripped away. No internet, no phone, no radio beyond the crackling, often indecipherable military frequencies. You are in a bubble, cut off from the entire world, often for weeks or even months at a time. News from home is a rare, precious commodity, delivered in coded messages that often arrive long after the events they describe. A letter from a loved one might take months to reach you, if it ever does, and by the time you read it, the news might be tragically outdated. Imagine the gnawing anxiety of not knowing if your family is safe, if your home is still standing, if the war has claimed someone you care about. The silence from the outside world is not peaceful. It's a suffocating void, filled with your own anxieties and dark imaginings. You become completely isolated, reliant solely on the small, insular community within the submarine for all human interaction. The news you do get, often grim reports of sinking ships and escalating casualties, only serves to amplify the sense of dread and helplessness. There's no escaping the war, no turning off the news. You are living it, breathing it, every single second of every single day. Your sense of perspective would warp. The small, petty concerns of your former life would seem utterly insignificant, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming imperatives of survival. The world outside the hull would become a distant, almost abstract concept, something you once inhabited but can now barely recall. This isolation is not just geographical, it's psychological and emotional. It strips away your connection to everything familiar, everything comforting, everything that defines your sense of self in the broader world. You are reduced to your most primal instincts, your immediate surroundings becoming your entire universe. And in this isolated pressure cooker environment, minor grievances can quickly escalate. We're talking about the human element, the unavoidable friction of being crammed together with dozens of other men. Let's talk about the crew dynamics, the inevitable, inescapable friction of being crammed into a metal tube with dozens of other men, each under immense stress, for weeks or months at a time. Forget your office politics. This is personal politics played out in the most claustrophobic arena imaginable. Every quirk, every annoying habit, every personality flaw is magnified 100-fold. That guy who chews loudly? Now he's the bane of your existence. The one who hums off-key? He's driving you to the brink of madness. There's no escaping them, no retreating to your own space. You are forced into an intimate, often uncomfortable proximity with men from every walk of life, men with different temperaments, different backgrounds, different ways of coping with extreme stress. Arguments, though often suppressed due to the strict discipline required for survival, simmer beneath the surface. Small grievances fester, becoming magnified in the confined pressure cooker environment. Resentments can build, leading to tension that could erupt at any moment, potentially compromising the safety of the entire boat. The crew relied on an unspoken code of conduct, a delicate balance of tolerance and mutual reliance. Discipline was paramount, enforced rigorously by the officers, because any breakdown in order could be catastrophic. But even with strict rules, human nature is human nature. You'd witness moments of profound camaraderie, men risking their lives for one another without a second thought. But you'd also witness moments of petty squabbling, of frayed nerves and short tempers, of men pushed to their absolute limits. The pressure of shared danger, while forging strong bonds, also amplified existing tensions. Imagine trying to maintain a professional demeanor, to perform your duties flawlessly, when you're silently seething with irritation at the man sleeping 2 feet from you, whose snoring sounds like a dying walrus. Your social skills, honed by years of navigating diverse social circles, would be tested to their absolute breaking point. There's no agreeing to disagree when you're literally living in each other's pockets. You learn to either adapt, to tolerate, or to find extremely subtle ways of expressing your displeasure without sparking an all-out mutiny. This unique social ecosystem, defined by extreme confinement and constant peril, would be a challenge unlike any you've ever faced. And let's not forget the sheer monotony of the patrols. Beyond the moments of terror and frantic action, there was the grinding, soul-crushing monotony of long patrols. Imagine weeks, sometimes months, spent in that dark, damp, confined space, where every day bled into the next, with little to distinguish them. The routine, while necessary for operational efficiency, was also a relentless adversary, slowly eroding your mental fortitude. Wake up, eat bland food, perform your duties, stare at gauges, listen to sonar, eat more bland food, try to sleep, repeat, day in, day out. The only breaks in this numbing cycle were the moments of extreme danger, which, while terrifying, at least provided a jolt of adrenaline and a clear objective. But in between those moments, it was a battle against boredom, against the endless expanse of the ocean outside and the equally endless expanse of time inside. There were no weekends, no holidays, no days off. Every day was a work day, every hour a shift. Your mind, accustomed to constant stimulation and novelty, would quickly rebel against this oppressive sameness. You'd find yourself staring blankly at the same bulkheads, tracing the same patterns in the condensation, listening to the same mechanical hums. Fantasies of home, of loved ones, of simple pleasures like a walk in a park or a fresh meal would become increasingly vivid, almost hallucinatory in their intensity. Some men would retreat into themselves, becoming withdrawn and silent. Others would find solace in the limited entertainment available, a worn deck of cards, a few dog-eared books, whispered stories and jokes shared in the dark. But even these diversions offered only temporary reprieve from the crushing weight of boredom and isolation. The absence of sensory stimulation, no fresh air, no sunlight, no changing landscapes, no new faces, would lead to a profound sense of deprivation. Your senses, accustomed to a rich tapestry of input, would feel dulled, starved. This wasn't just about passing the time, it was about preventing your mind from unraveling in the face of such relentless, mind-numbing repetition. The mental fortitude required to endure this monotonous existence while still maintaining peak operational readiness was truly extraordinary. And then there was the ever-present, haunting reality of death. Let's talk about death. Not in the abstract cinematic sense, but the raw, brutal, and terrifyingly intimate reality of it on a submarine. If a depth charge hit, if the hull breached, if a fire raged out of control, death wasn't just a possibility, it was an often swift, agonizing, and inescapable certainty. Imagine the chilling scenario of a compartment flooding, the water rushing in with incredible force, the screams of your shipmates drowned out by the roar of the incoming ocean. There's no escaping it, nowhere to run, or the horror of a fire, smoke filling the confined spaces, toxic fumes burning your lungs, flames licking at the bulkheads, threatening to ignite ammunition or fuel. In such close quarters, a fire could spread with terrifying speed, turning the entire boat into an inferno. And then there's the slow, agonizing death by suffocation if the air supply failed or if the boat was trapped on the bottom, slowly running out of oxygen. The knowledge that your fate was sealed, that rescue was impossible, that your last moments would be spent in darkness, cold, and terror. That's a burden that few modern minds could truly comprehend. You'd witness the suffering of your shipmates, hear their cries, see the fear in their eyes. There's no turning away, no closing your eyes to the horror. You are immersed in it, a helpless spectator to the unfolding tragedy. And even if you survived the immediate disaster, the psychological scars would be profound and permanent. The memory of what you witnessed, of the men you lost, would haunt your waking hours and infiltrate your nightmares for the rest of your life. The ocean, your intended domain, would transform into a vast, cold, indifferent tomb, perpetually threatening to claim you as well. This isn't about dying heroically. It's about the visceral, ignominious end that awaited so many, a death often without witnesses, without recognition, simply swallowed by the endless deep. The constant proximity to this ultimate fate, the chilling awareness that every dive could be your last, would weigh heavily on your soul, stripping away any illusions of invincibility. And even if you did make it back to port, the journey wasn't truly over. You've survived against all odds. You've returned to port. The boat is tied up, the gangplank is lowered, and you stumble out onto solid ground, blinking in the sunlight, perhaps a little unsteady on your feet. But the journey isn't truly over. The transition back to civilian life, or even just back to a non-combat role, is rarely smooth. You carry the war within you, a heavy, invisible burden. The sounds, the smells, the constant anxiety of the submarine, they don't simply vanish with the change of scenery. Your senses, hyper alert from months of combat, are overwhelmed by the cacophony of the port, the unfamiliar faces, the sheer openness of the sky above you. Sleep doesn't come easy. The silence of a normal bed can be just as unsettling as the constant noise of the submarine. You might find yourself waking in a cold sweat, convinced you hear the ping of sonar or the distant thrum of enemy propellers. The ordinary concerns of civilian life, paying bills, dealing with bureaucracy, engaging in polite conversation, can seem utterly trivial, even absurd, after what you've experienced. You've witnessed death, endured unimaginable hardship, and confronted your own mortality on a daily basis. The people around you, those who haven't been to the deep, cannot truly understand what you've been through. There's a profound sense of isolation, a chasm between your experiences and theirs. Many submariners struggled with what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, though it wasn't formally understood or treated in the same way back then. They carried their trauma in silence, often self-medicating with alcohol or retreating into themselves. Relationships with family and friends could suffer, strained by the unspoken horrors they'd endured. The simple act of being on land, with its vast open spaces, could feel unnerving After months spent in the confined, predictable in its own way environment of a submarine, the freedom you thought you craved could be disorienting. You were trained to operate in a world of immediate life or death decisions, and the slower pace of peacetime life could feel like a form of torture in itself. The skills that kept you alive at sea, hypervigilance, a constant sense of threat, an almost animalistic focus on survival, were not easily shed. They could manifest as irritability, paranoia, or an inability to relax. The submariner, the man who had stared into the abyss and survived, was forever changed. And for you, the modern observer, the realization sinks in. This wasn't a profession for the faint of heart or the easily squeamish. It was a crucible that forged men, or broke them. The sheer physical toll, even after returning to shore, was immense. Your body, accustomed to the constant, low-level stress and the unforgiving environment, might have struggled to readjust. Muscle atrophy from lack of real exercise, constant fatigue from sleep deprivation, lingering effects of poor nutrition and questionable water, these were all part of the package. You might find yourself perpetually tired, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could fully alleviate. The damp, cold environment of the submarine could also contribute to chronic joint pain or respiratory issues that lingered long after you left the boat. Imagine trying to explain to your doctor why you have persistent aches and pains that no one can quite diagnose. The medical understanding of these conditions was rudimentary at best during the war, and the long-term effects were often overlooked. Furthermore, the constant exposure to diesel fumes, hydraulic fluid, and other industrial byproducts within the confined space of the submarine could have had lasting health consequences, though these were not always immediately apparent. The lack of sunlight would also have impacted vitamin D levels, contributing to bone health issues. Your body, in essence, had been subjected to a prolonged siege, and its recovery would be a long, arduous process, if it ever truly completed. The mental scars, as we've discussed, were just as profound, if not more so. The hypervigilance, the anxiety, the nightmares, these weren't temporary conditions that vanished with the end of a patrol. For many, they were lifelong companions, a constant reminder of the horrors they had witnessed and endured. The psychological armor you had to develop to survive the war could become a prison in peacetime, isolating you from those you loved and making it difficult to find peace. The bravest among them, those who had shown incredible fortitude and skill at sea, might find themselves utterly incapable of navigating the complexities of everyday life. They were men who had stared into the face of death, who had lived in a world where every second counted, and the return to normalcy was a challenge more daunting than any they had faced beneath the waves. This wasn't just about enduring hardship, it was about emerging from that crucible fundamentally altered. And for you, the viewer, this entire journey has been a stark, unflinching reminder. Your modern life, with all its perceived inconveniences, is an unimaginable luxury. Let's be clear, the romanticized image of the submarine crew, the stoic heroes, the daring adventurers, is a carefully constructed myth. The reality was far grittier, far more brutal, and far less glamorous. These men weren't chasing glory, they were engaged in a desperate, often terrifying fight for survival in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. They endured conditions that would break most people within hours, if not minutes. The constant fear, the physical discomfort, the psychological strain, the sheer unrelenting monotony, it all added up to an experience that was profoundly dehumanizing. They were confined in a metal tube, breathing recycled air, eating processed food, and constantly facing the very real possibility of a violent, agonizing death. There was no room for error, no second chances. Every decision, every action had life or death consequences. The resilience required was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. They had to suppress their own fears, their own discomfort, their own humanity in order to perform their duties effectively. They became cogs in a complex, unforgiving machine, their individual needs and desires secondary to the mission and the survival of the crew. The stories of heroism and bravery are true, but they are rooted in an understanding of the extreme adversity these men faced. They were not born heroes. They were forged in the crucible of the deep, in the dark, cold, suffocating belly of the submarine. Their courage wasn't a flamboyant display. It was a quiet, persistent refusal to succumb to the overwhelming forces arrayed against them. And when you consider the average modern person, with their reliance on comfort, their sensitivity to minor inconveniences, and their fragile mental fortitude, the idea of surviving even a single day on a World War II submarine seems utterly preposterous. You are insulated from the harsh realities that shaped these men. You can retreat. You can complain. You can find a warm room and a cup of tea. They had none of those options. They had only the steel hull, the oppressive depths, and each other. And that, my friends, is the stark, unvarnished truth. Think about it. You're accustomed to instant gratification, to readily available solutions, to environments designed for your comfort. Imagine being thrust into a world where every single aspect of your existence is a struggle. The air you breathe is a finite resource, meticulously managed. The food you eat is preserved, often unpalatable, and rationed. The water you drink has been purified and repurified, carrying a faint metallic tang. Your living space is a fraction of what you'd consider acceptable, shared with dozens of other men, with no possibility of privacy. The noise is constant, a cacophony of machinery that grinds away at your nerves. And all of this is happening while you are aware that at any moment, a single miscalculation, a stray enemy torpedo, or a critical system failure could lead to your instantaneous, gruesome death. The psychological pressure would be immense. Your modern brain, wired for comfort and connectivity, would simply not be equipped to handle the relentless assault of fear, isolation, and deprivation. You'd likely succumb to panic, despair, or debilitating anxiety long before your first watch was over. Your physical body, accustomed to a sedentary lifestyle and a diet rich in nutrients and variety, would revolt against the harsh conditions. Cramps, nausea, skin infections, exhaustion. These would become your new normal within hours. You wouldn't have the honed instincts, the physical conditioning, or the mental toughness that these sailors developed through rigorous training and sheer necessity. You are soft, you are unprepared. You are, frankly, a liability in such an environment. The submarine was not a place for the uninitiated. It was a specialized, high-risk environment that demanded the absolute best from its crew. And even then, survival was never guaranteed. So when you see those old grainy photos, when you hear the stories of bravery, remember that those were not ordinary men. They were men who faced extraordinary circumstances and who, through a combination of training, discipline, and sheer grit, managed to survive in a world that was designed to kill them. And for you, the idea of surviving a single day is a laughable, almost cruel, hypothetical. The sheer sensory overload, or rather, the sensory deprivation coupled with intense, unpleasant stimuli, would be overwhelming. Your eyes, accustomed to the bright lights of modern life, would struggle in the dim, often flickering, illumination of the submarine. The constant gloom would contribute to disorientation and fatigue. The smells, diesel fuel, sweat, unwashed bodies, stale food, bilge water, would be a constant, cloying presence, an olfactory assault that would never truly dissipate. The sounds, the ceaseless hum of machinery, the groaning of the hull, the muffled shouts of crewmates, the terrifying ping of sonar, would create a constant state of anxiety, making it impossible to truly relax or find peace. Your sense of touch would be dominated by the cold, damp surfaces, the rough textures of worn equipment, the clammy feel of your own skin. There would be no soft furnishings, no gentle breezes, no warmth of the Sunday. Every sensory input would be a reminder of the harsh, unforgiving environment. Your modern brain, accustomed to a rich and varied sensory landscape, would be starved and simultaneously bombarded by unpleasant stimuli. This constant sensory dissonance would contribute significantly to disorientation, anxiety, and a general feeling of being overwhelmed. You wouldn't just be physically uncomfortable, your very perception of reality would be distorted. Imagine trying to maintain focus, to make critical decisions, when your senses are under such constant, relentless assault. It would be like trying to run a marathon while being blindfolded, deafened, and constantly poked. And the body, of course, would react. The nervous system would be in a perpetual state of high alert, leading to exhaustion, irritability, and a host of psychosomatic complaints. You'd find yourself constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound, your nerves frayed beyond repair. This isn't just about enduring discomfort, it's about the fundamental disconnect between your modern sensory experience and the brutal reality of submarine life. And let's not forget the food, or what passes for it. Your modern palate, accustomed to a diverse range of flavors, textures, and fresh ingredients, would find submarine rations utterly revolting. Think about the constant rotation of canned meats, dehydrated vegetables that never quite rehydrate properly, and powdered eggs that have the consistency of gritty paste. There was little to no fresh produce after the initial days out of port, leading to a risk of vitamin deficiencies and scurvy. The cooks, despite their best efforts, were working with extremely limited resources, often in cramped, hot conditions. Meals were about sustenance, not pleasure. Imagine eating the same few monotonous dishes day after day, week after week, with little variation and even less flavor. The smell of the galley, mingled with the other odors of the submarine, would do little to whet your appetite. Many sailors suffered from chronic nausea and indigestion due to the poor quality of the food and the constant motion of the boat. The psychological impact of such a monotonous and unappetizing diet should not be underestimated. Food is often a source of comfort and social connection, and the lack thereof would contribute to low morale and a general sense of despair. You might find yourself fantasizing about simple things: a crisp piece of fruit, a fresh salad, a warm, crusty loaf of bread. These everyday luxuries, taken for granted on the surface, would become almost mythical in their desirability. The sheer lack of culinary enjoyment would add another layer of misery to an already unbearable existence. Your body, starved of proper nutrition and accustomed to a more varied diet, would likely begin to protest in various ways, from skin problems to general lethargy, and the thought of the water, desalinated, recycled, and often tasting of metal, would do little to quench your thirst or your spirits. It's a grim testament to the conditions when even the basic act of eating becomes a chore. The sheer isolation, the feeling of being utterly cut off from the rest of humanity, would be a profound psychological blow. Imagine being in constant communication with your shipmates, yet feeling profoundly alone. The world outside the hull would become a distant, almost irrelevant concept. News from home would be scarce, often delayed, and filtered through military channels. You wouldn't have the luxury of a quick phone call or an email to reassure yourself that loved ones were safe. The uncertainty would be a constant companion, gnawing at your peace of mind. The submarine, designed for stealth and combat, was inherently an environment of isolation. You were removed from the familiar rhythms of life on land, from the changing seasons, from the simple act of seeing the sun rise and set over a familiar horizon. Your entire universe would shrink to the confines of the metal tube and the faces of the men around you. This extreme isolation, combined with the constant threat of danger, would create a potent cocktail of stress and anxiety. You'd be forced to confront your own thoughts, your own fears, without the usual distractions of modern life. The lack of external stimulation of new experiences would lead to a profound sense of stagnation. Your mind, starved of novelty, might begin to turn inwards, dwelling on anxieties and regrets. The camaraderie of the crew, while essential for survival, could not fully compensate for the deep-seated human need for connection with the wider world. You would be, in essence, a castaway, adrift in the vast, indifferent ocean, with only your shipmates and your own dwindling resources to keep you company. This profound sense of separation from humanity would be a challenge that many would struggle to overcome, even after the war ended. The psychological scars of such isolation would run deep, influencing their relationships and their outlook on life for years to come. The constant noise, or rather, the lack of true silence, would be a torment. The submarine was never truly quiet. There was always the hum of the engines, the whirring of the ventilation systems, the creak and groan of the hull under pressure, the distant sounds of the ocean, and of course, the conversations and movements of the crew. This relentless auditory environment would make true rest and relaxation virtually impossible. Sleep would be fitful and shallow, constantly interrupted by the mechanical symphony of the boat. Your brain, deprived of periods of true silence, would be in a perpetual state of heightened awareness, leading to exhaustion and irritability. Imagine trying to concentrate on a task, to have a meaningful conversation, or simply to find a moment of peace when your ears are constantly being assaulted by a barrage of mechanical and human noise. This constant auditory stimulation would contribute to stress, anxiety, and a feeling of never being able to truly switch off. Your nervous system would be on constant high alert, unable to find respite. This isn't just about annoyance, it's about a fundamental disruption of your body's natural rhythms. Humans are wired for periods of quiet and rest, and the absence of these would have a profound impact on both physical and mental health. The lack of true silence would also amplify the fear. In a quiet environment, subtle sounds become noticeable, and any unfamiliar noise can be interpreted as a threat. On a submarine, where the environment was already fraught with danger, the inability to find silence would mean a constant underlying tension. You would never truly feel safe, never truly at ease. The noise itself becomes a palpable manifestation of the peril you are in. It's a constant, unsettling reminder of the forces at play, both mechanical and environmental, that could lead to your demise. The constant dampness and lack of fresh air would create a breeding ground for mold and mildew, further contributing to the unpleasant olfactory experience and the health risks. This pervasive moisture would seep into everything, making clothes feel perpetually clammy and contributing to skin ailments. Imagine waking up every morning feeling like you'd slept in a damp sponge. The air, heavy with the exhaled breaths of dozens of men, combined with the various industrial smells, would create a thick, cloying atmosphere that would leave you feeling perpetually sluggish and unrefreshed. Your lungs, accustomed to cleaner air, would struggle. The risk of respiratory infections would be significantly higher, and the general feeling of malaise would be constant. This isn't just about discomfort, it's about the insidious way in which these environmental factors would undermine your physical and mental well-being. Your body, deprived of clean air and adequate warmth, would be constantly fighting an uphill battle, and the psychological impact of living in such an environment should not be underestimated. The constant feeling of being enclosed, of breathing stale air, of being surrounded by dampness and grime, would contribute to feelings of depression, anxiety, and claustrophobia. You would constantly crave the simple sensation of fresh air on your skin, the feeling of a dry environment. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that these men were able to function, let alone fight, in such conditions for extended periods. But for you, the unprepared modern individual, the assault on your senses and your physical comfort would be immediate and overwhelming. The lack of a clean, dry, and breathable environment would be one of the first and perhaps most significant barriers to your survival. The sheer lack of privacy, the inability to find even a moment of solitude, would be profoundly unsettling. On a submarine, your life is lived in full view of your shipmates. Every action, every conversation, every private moment is, by necessity, a shared experience. There are no doors to close, no personal spaces to retreat to. This constant proximity, while fostering a sense of camaraderie, also creates an intense pressure. Imagine trying to have a private thought, to process a difficult emotion, or simply to collect yourself when you are constantly surrounded by other people. The lack of personal space would lead to heightened irritability, increased tension, and a feeling of being constantly scrutinized. You would be forced to adapt to a communal existence that is antithetical to modern sensibilities. The concept of personal boundaries would be virtually non-existent. This constant immersion in the lives of others and the exposure of your own life to them would be a significant psychological challenge. It would strip away any pretense of individuality and force you into a collective identity where the needs of the group always supersede the desires of the individual. For someone accustomed to personal space and privacy, this would be a deeply disorienting and uncomfortable experience. The lack of solitude would also make it difficult to process the immense stress and trauma of submarine warfare. There would be no quiet place to reflect, to grieve, or to simply gather your thoughts. You would be forced to confront your emotions in the shared space, often in the presence of others, which could lead to further discomfort and a reluctance to express vulnerability. This relentless social immersion, devoid of personal respite, would be a significant factor in the psychological toll of submarine service. Let's talk about hygiene, or the distinct lack thereof. Forget hot showers and scented soaps. Personal hygiene on a submarine was a rudimentary affair driven by necessity and the severe limitations of fresh water. Showers were a rare luxury, typically taken only when surfaced and when water conservation allowed. Most of the time, sailors relied on quick sponge baths with limited amounts of desalinated water, or simply wiped themselves down with a damp cloth. This meant that body odor was a pervasive issue. In the already foul-smelling environment of the submarine, the smell of unwashed bodies only compounded the olfactory assault. Skin conditions, exacerbated by sweat, constant humidity, and the inability to properly clean oneself, were rampant. Rashes, fungal infections, and boils were common complaints. The lack of proper sanitation also meant that minor cuts and abrasions could easily become infected, posing a serious health risk in an environment with limited medical facilities. Imagine trying to heal a wound when you can't even properly wash it. Your skin would likely become greasy, your hair matted, and your overall sense of cleanliness would be non-existent. This constant state of uncleanliness would be not only physically uncomfortable but also psychologically demoralizing. The inability to feel truly clean would contribute to a general sense of malaise and degradation. It's a stark contrast to the modern obsession with cleanliness and hygiene, highlighting the vastly different standards of living and survival in the past. The submariner's reality was one of constant battle against grime and the pervasive scent of his own unwashed self, a reality that would be a profound shock to anyone accustomed to the amenities of modern life. The constant motion of the submarine, even when submerged, would take a significant toll on your body. The rocking and swaying of the vessel, while perhaps less violent than on the surface, would still be enough to induce seasickness in many. Imagine trying to perform complex tasks, or even just eat a meal, while your inner ear is telling you that the world is spinning out of control. This constant motion would contribute to fatigue, nausea, and a general feeling of disorientation. It would be difficult to find a comfortable position to sleep, and even simple movements like walking would require a conscious effort to maintain balance. For those prone to motion sickness, the experience would be a daily torment, leading to dehydration, exhaustion, and a complete lack of appetite. Even if you manage to adapt and overcome the initial seasickness, the constant subtle motion would still contribute to a general feeling of unease and fatigue. Your body, accustomed to the stability of solid ground, would be in a constant state of subtle imbalance. This would affect everything from your coordination to your ability to concentrate. The prolonged exposure to this constant motion would be a physically and psychologically draining experience, adding another layer of misery to the already challenging conditions of submarine life. It's a reminder that even the most fundamental aspects of our existence, like maintaining balance and feeling grounded, are taken for granted until they are violently disrupted. The sea, in its infinite power, would constantly remind you of its presence, even in the supposed safety of your metal sanctuary. The risk of fire was a constant, terrifying threat on a submarine. The confined space, filled with flammable materials like fuel, oil, and electrical wiring, combined with the limited ventilation, meant that any fire could quickly become uncontrollable. Imagine the horror of smoke filling the tight corridors, flames licking at the bulkheads, and the knowledge that escape was virtually impossible. In such a confined environment, a fire could spread with terrifying speed, consuming oxygen and producing toxic fumes that would incapacitate the crew. Damage control teams would have to act with incredible speed and bravery to contain and extinguish any blaze, often working in near impenetrable smoke and heat. The psychological toll of this constant threat cannot be overstated. Every flicker of a light, every unusual smell, every mechanical malfunction could be interpreted as a precursor to a devastating fire. This constant state of alert, a heightened anxiety, and the knowledge that a single spark could lead to a catastrophic inferno would weigh heavily on the minds of the crew. The submarine, a marvel of engineering, was also a floating bomb, and the men aboard were acutely aware of this precarious reality. The fear of fire was not an abstract concern, it was a tangible, ever-present danger that underscored the extreme risks of submarine warfare. You, accustomed to fire alarms and readily available fire extinguishers, would be utterly helpless in such a situation. The speed at which a fire could engulf the vessel and the lack of escape routes would make survival highly unlikely. The sheer lack of control over your environment would be a significant psychological burden. On a submarine, you are at the mercy of the boat's systems, the ocean's pressure, and the decisions of your commanding officers. Your personal autonomy is drastically reduced. You sleep when you are told to sleep, eat when you are told to eat, and perform tasks whether you feel ready or not. This lack of agency, combined with the constant threat of danger, can be incredibly stressful. Your modern life is characterized by a high degree of personal control. You choose when to eat, when to sleep, when to engage with others, and when to seek solitude. The submarine environment is the antithesis of this. You are a small part of a much larger, highly controlled system. This lack of personal freedom, while necessary for the functioning of the submarine, would be a constant source of frustration and anxiety for someone accustomed to making their own choices. The feeling of being trapped, not only physically within the hull, but also within a rigid schedule and a chain of command, would be a profound psychological challenge. Your sense of self, your ability to assert your own will, would be severely tested. This surrender of personal control, while essential for survival in such a high-stakes environment, would be a deeply unsettling experience for a modern individual. The very air you breathe is a reminder of your precarious situation. Recycled, filtered, and monitored with meticulous care, the air inside a submarine is a far cry from the fresh, clean atmosphere you're used to. This isn't just about a stale smell, it's about the physical effects of breathing air that has been recirculated dozens, if not hundreds of times. Over extended patrols, the oxygen levels could dip, and the concentration of carbon dioxide could rise, leading to headaches, fatigue, and a general feeling of sluggishness. The filters, though crucial, could only do so much, and the air would inevitably become laden with the byproducts of human respiration, as well as the pervasive odors of diesel fuel, machinery, and unwashed bodies. For someone accustomed to the abundance of fresh air, this recycled atmosphere would feel heavy, oppressive, and insidiously unhealthy. Your body, deprived of truly invigorating air, would struggle to function at its peak. You might experience a persistent sense of being off, a subtle but pervasive malaise that is difficult to pinpoint. The constant breathing of this compromised air would also contribute to the general feeling of being in an unnatural, unhealthy environment. It's a stark contrast to the open skies and fresh breezes you take for granted, and a constant, albeit invisible, reminder of the artificiality and inherent dangers of submarine life. Your lungs, accustomed to expansive, clean air, would feel constricted, never truly satisfied. The concept of downtime as you know it would cease to exist. There are no leisurely weekends, no extended vacations, no spontaneous days off. Your time is dictated by the needs of the submarine and the demands of the mission. Even during periods of relative quiet, you are still on duty, always on call, always ready to spring into action. The constant vigilance required means that true relaxation is a luxury few can afford. Your mind is always on alert, processing information, anticipating potential threats, and remaining ready to respond. This relentless demand on your attention and energy would lead to profound exhaustion. There would be no opportunity to truly disconnect, to recharge your batteries, or to simply do nothing. Every moment is accounted for, either through active duty, maintenance, or essential rest periods that are constantly at risk of being interrupted. This absence of genuine leisure time would contribute to burnout, stress, and a feeling of never being able to truly let your guard down. The very concept of a break would be foreign, replaced by a perpetual state of readiness. This lack of respite, this constant pressure to perform, would be a significant factor in the psychological toll of submarine life, pushing you to your absolute limits. The inherent danger of the submarine itself, as a vessel, would be a constant source of anxiety. These were not the sleek, technologically advanced submarines of today. They were often older, their systems pushed to their limits, and their structural integrity constantly tested by the immense pressures of the deep. Even without enemy action, the risk of catastrophic failure was ever present. A mechanical malfunction, a structural weakness, a moment of human error, any of these could lead to a disaster. The knowledge that you are enclosed in a metal tube, miles from safety, dependent on a complex array of machinery that could fail at any moment, would be a constant underlying dread. This is not just about the external threat of the enemy, it's about the inherent vulnerability of the vessel itself. The creaks and groans of the hull, the occasional shudder from a minor system issue, these would all be amplified in significance, each one a potential harbinger of doom. You are, in essence, putting your life in the hands of engineers and mechanics who have done their best with the technology of the time, but who cannot guarantee absolute safety. This inherent risk, this awareness of the boat's fragility, would contribute to the pervasive sense of unease and the constant state of vigilance. It's a stark reminder that even in the absence of an enemy, the environment itself is a formidable adversary. The constant need to conserve resources, water, electricity, even air, would dictate every aspect of life on board. There would be no long, hot showers, no leisurely brushing of teeth with copious amounts of water, no running the tap while you do other things. Every drop of fresh water was precious, carefully managed and rationed. Electricity generated by the engines was also a limited commodity, meaning that lights were kept dim and non-essential equipment was kept off to conserve power. This constant awareness of scarcity would permeate every action. You would learn to be incredibly efficient, to make do with less, to prioritize your needs and those of the crew. This enforced frugality while necessary for survival, would be a stark contrast to the abundance and wastefulness of modern life. The psychological impact of living in such a resource-constrained environment should not be underestimated. It reinforces the sense of isolation and vulnerability, highlighting just how fragile your existence is. The lack of basic comforts, driven by the need for conservation, would add another layer of discomfort and challenge to an already difficult existence. You would constantly be making choices that on the surface seem trivial: how long to run the tap, how much water to use for washing, but which in this context have significant implications for the survival of the entire crew. This constant calculation and conservation would be an exhausting mental exercise, further contributing to the overall strain.